Thank you, Elizabeth. Good morning, everyone. It is so great to see all of you. I tell you, I just wish Helen Oakes was here with us this morning. She would have loved this. I hope that all of you got a chance to listen to Jeffrey Oakes's video because he described his mom in such, in terms that are just so familiar to me. I met Helen Oakes. And before I get into this, I'd just like to thank Dennis and Deborah, Jeffrey and Nicole, and the other members of the Helen Oakes family for sponsoring the Helen Oakes Literacy Institute. This is our third year, our third institute. And this is really exciting. I love our new platform. I'd also like to thank my fabulous team, Elizabeth, Paula and Jude. They have really worked hard to put this together. And our great speakers, Elizabeth will be introducing them in very, very shortly. Just want to tell you a few things, some personal things about Helen that I remember almost daily. I met Helen in 1980. Now, don't start adding and subtracting to get my age, but it was in 1980. I had just been appointed elementary school principal at the Jackson School at 12th and Federal. I was a brand new principal and scared to death. Not sure that I was well prepared to be a principal, but went to Jackson School. And shortly after that, in my first year, was told that I was going to be visited by a school board member. And her name was Helen Oakes. And I have to tell you, I read about her. And I read about her amazing service on the school board. That she was tough, honest, transparent, and that she always wanted to look at data and wanted to know exactly what was going on in schools. And not like other school board members you may know, she stayed all day. She didn't just walk through the school. She wanted to see classrooms. She wanted to see kids learning. She wanted to see children and teachers. And so she came to my school. She spent a full day. I remember us debriefing. And I learned so much from her. And that was just the first of many, many visits to Jackson School. She was so respected by everyone. And her values, she had such integrity. Her values of ethics and learning. She was just always talked about teaching and learning. She was dedicated, and she was very much interested in quality. And of course, at the end of the day, her love of literacy, of reading, of teaching reading and writing just always shined through. One of the things that Helen did, and I actually got a chance to go with her on many visits, was she visited teachers' homes. And there were these collaboratives and these little networks. And I remember one in West Philadelphia. That's the first one I went to with her. And it was in a teacher's home, and it was very informal. And teachers just talked about some of the issues they were facing, and other teachers chimed in and talked about some of the solutions and made some suggestions. And that became something that happened on a weekly basis. Helen would go all over the city, visiting teachers in teachers' homes with small groups of teachers. She was such a champion of you. You are the teachers who make the difference for all of our children. To honor her legacy, the Helen Oakes Literacy Institute was created for Philadelphia public school teachers. You're the most important person in a child's life. There's no question about it, in addition to their parents. The teacher can make the difference. One teacher can change the life of a child. Helen knew it then. She instilled it in everyone she met. and she made an impact, a real impact on education in Philadelphia. This year, we will be convening additional sessions for a real rigorous and vital community of practice. And that will be done throughout the year. So I really hope you love our new platform. Without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Elizabeth so that we can get started. So thank you all for being here. I look forward to a great morning. Elizabeth?
Thanks, Rhonda. Again, I just want to thank everybody for being here. We are so excited for this year's topics: equitable access to literacy, educational justice, and the science of reading. We have some amazing speakers with us this year: Nancy Scharf from Read by Fourth, Suruchi Keenhill from the AIM Institute for Learning and Research, Christina Grayson from Mastery Charter Schools, Jacqueline Gabali of St. Joseph's University, and we also have an amazing keynote speaker, Erica Snowden, who is from Friends Central School. So we're so happy that you joined us. You do not have to leave this Zoom link. This link where you are right now, we're just going to keep moving through the program. So don't feel like you have to jump in and out. If we put you in breakout rooms, we will move you. So again, thanks everybody for joining us, and I'm going to turn it over to Nancy.
Thank you, Elizabeth, and thank you, Paula, and Foundations, Inc. and the Helen Institute, Literacy Institute, for inviting us here today. It's a real honor. And thank you to all the teachers who are attending, and by your presence are showing that you're open to learning more about equitable literacy instruction and evidence-based practices. Let me just introduce myself for a moment. Again, Nancy Scharf, and I'm a literacy consultant to the Read by Fourth campaign. I'm a special ed teacher by background. I've taught every grade, K to 6. I've been in the field over 25 years, including as executive director of the predecessor organization to ReadWorks, an organization many of you may know and be familiar with. And 10 years ago, to strengthen my knowledge and my skills in the science of reading, I got a master's of special ed from St. Joseph's University. So again, thanks to the Helen Oakes Institute. And I want to say that I was reading about Helen Oakes, and she really is an inspiration. And there was a line in some of the articles that were shared. It said that she has the clout that comes from providing a thoughtful, comprehensive look at a topic. And that's what we hope to do for you all here today. So I think if we can go to the slides, I'm going to introduce Read by Fourth. We're going to be talking about model field placements which embody evidence-based literacy instruction. And we're going to tell you the story of how we came to focus on the development of these model field placements. But first, let's go to the next slide. And what you'll see is an introduction to Read by Fourth, because I think many of you may not be quite familiar with So as you can see, Read by Fourth is bringing together families, activists, culture shifters, and system shakers. Try to say that 3 times fast. So it's everyone in the city that can have an impact on making sure that our kids can read by the time they get to 4th grade. And among those groups, there's, as I mentioned, the systems shakers. So the systems individuals are universities, nonprofits, foundations, and the school systems, public, charter, and Catholic. So what Read by Fourth does, it's a very small organization. There's only 5 or 6 of us, depending on the day. And we bring together these partners and try to make sure that together we do something that's more powerful and impactful than what we would do alone. Now, one of the groups of Read by Fourth that you're going to hear from today is called Teacher Preparation and Support. So these partners came together and said, we need to strengthen how our teachers are prepared with evidence-based literacy practices in order to meet this goal of all children reading by the time they get to fourth grade. And the reason is effective literacy instruction, as it says on this slide, is central to educational equity. So our goal is to make sure that as teachers enter the field, they have the skills and the knowledge, and that you're empowered to really teach all kids to read. So if we can go to the next slide. This group said, well, how can we better prepare teachers to teach reading? And the answer is providing them with evidence-based instruction in reading. And there are two components to the evidence. One is culturally responsive teaching, and the other is science of reading. And we need these two evidence-based practices to come together to have the strongest, best impact. So if you go to the next slide, the group thought about, well, how do we know whether a university program is actually aligned with the science of reading? And what we embraced is the knowledge and practice standards that were developed for teachers of reading to evaluate university programs. And they were developed by the International Dyslexia Association. So what happens is a university makes an application that says, we believe we meet these standards. Then they're reviewed by the International Dyslexia Association, and they're hopefully, not always, but they are accredited. And because of that review, we can be confident that these programs actually embody the science of reading in their teacher preparation. So if you go to the next slide, through the work of Read by Fourth partners, we have been able to get 11 programs accredited as meeting these standards in Pennsylvania. So you can see there's a number of universities around Philadelphia. Let me just make the point, it's not the whole school of education, it's individual programs. But so Drexel, Temple, St. Joe's, Arcadia, and then you'll see AIM Institute. It's not a university, but their professional development programs are in fact accredited by the IDA. So this created some momentum and we were feeling positive about it, but then we realized that there was a vital component in teacher preparation that was missing. That the field placements, so these teachers had the knowledge of the science of reading, but then they would go into a school for a field placement, and there might be one or two elements of the science of reading that were embraced, but it was not a place where they could hone evidence-based reading skills and develop them. So if we go to the next slide, this is really why we think this is so important. And I'm just going to read this quote if I can. My screen is actually, let's see. It says, when teacher candidates are deployed to placements that implement incongruent literacy practices, they are likely to abandon what they learned in their coursework and espouse literacy practices in line with their cooperating teacher, and later adopt these methods as their own. So essentially, the coursework in the university programs is lost if it's not reinforced in the classroom. So I just want to pause for a moment and let you sort of just reflect on whether that resonates with you. Is that your experience, or do you see that in the field? I think I just got bounced out.
No, you're still here.
I can't see the screen though. Okay, there we go. Great. So if we go to the next slide, what we realized these partners realized is that there are singular and isolated changes that are being embraced around evidence-based reading instruction, but they're not enough. They fall short. So let's just look at the first one, the science of reading aligned curriculum. Many schools adopt a phonics program and it's aligned with the science, but maybe frequently they don't have adequate PD for you as teachers, or there's not staffing available to differentiate instruction, or there's not alignment with a multi-tier system of support. So what we hope you see today is how much more it takes to align a school with the science of reading versus sort of singular or isolated changes. So if we go to the next slide, the partners realized that we need a comprehensive model for developing quality science of reading field placements. So as you can see, there's not one or two, there's 7 different drivers. So to really have quality instruction, it can only be accomplished over time in each of these areas, and we call these areas drivers. And they're embodied in, as you can see in the bottom, dynamic early literacy framework. It's a whole framework of looking at each of these areas and seeing how they are aligned with evidence-based reading instruction or the science of reading or not. So let me just pause for a second and maybe just take a look at each one of those and ask yourself whether you see that in your school. And that's something we can talk about in the breakout sessions later. So what we see as partners is we have to work together, not only as partners, but within the school, it has to be a school-wide approach. It's not, you as a teacher can't do it yourself. It has to be the leadership and the whole system at the school working together. So going to the next slide. So this is how the model field placement initiative came together. The partners, Read by Fourth, together with AIM Institute, you're going to hear from all of these today. Mastery Charter Schools were in 2 of their schools working on this model. St. Joseph's University is placing student teachers in these schools. And then the foundations, the Hamilton Foundation and the Tremaine Foundation, it takes it all to be able to make these changes happen. So if you go to the next slide, here is a graphic that we hope, captures the whole effort that we're undertaking. And I want to bring your attention right to the center, to that red circle. And it's red and it's in the center for good reason. It's quality science of reading instructional system. It's not a classroom here or there, or it's not just just the second grade teachers, or it's the whole instructional system needs to be impacted. So what are the inputs? The inputs are at the top there in pink. It's training, it's professional development in the science of reading for leaders and teachers across the entire school. And in the mastery schools we're working with, it's all catered to teachers, the leaders, the assistant principals, the coaches, the special ed teachers, everybody getting that background knowledge. The second input is systems analysis and change. So we want to look at those 7 drivers that we talked about. So leadership and professional development and parent engagement, it all needs to be looked at and supported over time. And then student teachers, new teacher input are coming into a quality science of reading instructional system. And what outcomes we get are student literacy proficiency and new teachers who have seen in the field what they learned in the classroom. So if you can go to the next slide. And one thing we know for sure is that this is only going to be effective, this whole system, in schools where culturally responsive teaching is foregrounded in every initiative. So you can see that we've washed over the entire Science of Reading initiative as meeting the impact of culturally responsive teaching. And you're going to hear more about this from Christina Grayson. So now for some introductions. So the team you're going to hear from today, you've heard from me, Suruchi Keenhill, Director of Instructional Coaching and Training at AIM, Christina Grayson, Assistant Director of Early Literacy at Mastery Charter Schools, and Jacqueline Galbally, who is Assistant Professor and will be a researcher on this, a project researcher from St. Joseph's University. And just a few items about the format. Each of our speakers is going to speak for 20 or 30 minutes, and then there'll be 10 or 15 minutes of breakout session. We know it's a really large group, and so it's hard to have a discussion and an exchange in that larger group. So hopefully we'll have these breakout rooms that will be able to foster discussion. So our hope today, you're going to hear a lot today, is hope you're open and curious and you engage in inquiry. So when you hear, some of this information, how does that resonate with your current mindset or your school or your students? So maybe you can be asking yourself those questions. And then lastly, next slide. For the breakout sessions, we encourage you to think about, as you're hearing to each of our speakers, how do you connect to what they're saying? How does what they're saying extend what you already know? And what's challenging you? What do you not feel resonating? And the STEM, I used to think, and now I think, is another way to take your thoughts to the breakout session. So last slide, thank you all for being here. I'm looking forward to seeing many of you in the breakout session. And I want to note that we're going to be leaving behind the PowerPoints and all the resources that we have mentioned, and they'll be on the platform for you to look at your leisure over time. So thank you. And I would like to say that I'm going to introduce Suruchi Keenhill. She will be addressing professional development. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Just had to get my screen situated. It is so good to be with you this morning. Again, my name is Suruchi Keenhill, and I am with the AIM Institute for Learning and Research. And I have had the pleasure of working on this partnership and representing the efforts towards professional development, ensuring that there's aligned professional development across the system, right? Leaders, teachers, and so what we've been doing is we have this asynchronous coursework that our teachers and leaders have all been going through, and it looks like this. It's in our online learning platform, and it's essentially a graduate level course, and the reason being because there is so much brain-based information that we know about reading and writing acquisition. And so we wanted to make sure that there was a common knowledge and vocabulary that all of the folks within the system who have the ability to impact student literacy outcomes are all operating with. This content, as Nancy said, It is accredited by the International Dyslexia Association. It's totally aligned with those knowledge and practice standards for teachers of reading that Nancy referenced. And so the coursework was done asynchronously, but then there were opportunities, aside from learning and practicing the material, to focus on application. And that was done through a variety of different ways. One, within the platform, there were student snapshots such as this one built in, where teachers and leaders could get to know different student situations, look at artifacts of that student's literacy abilities and what they might need next. And so after getting to meet different students, they'd go through this process of identifying, given reading difficulties that a student might be having, diagnosing the underlying root cause, and then recommending really strategic interventions. So the application started through work within the platform. But then from there, we felt it was really important to have synchronous community of practice meetings. So what happened was, at the beginning of the summer, all of the teachers and leaders were oriented to the platform. And then the leaders went through the coursework and engaged with communities of practice over the summer. And their goal was to leave with a literacy leadership plan that would address all of the different factors that go into effective literacy leadership. So looking at professional development opportunities for teachers that would be ongoing and continuing to increase alignment with the science of reading, alignment with the knowledge and practice standards for teachers of reading. They also planned around the principles of structured literacy that they learned about through the asynchronous coursework. We had a big focus on diagnostic and prescriptive literacy instruction, really being intentional about collecting certain types of foundational skills data on literacy, and then making use of that data in ways that would really support given students with their individual literacy goals. The planning also focused on setting a vision for the different domains that go into building literacy proficiency among students. So oral language, phonological and phonemic awareness, phonics and fluency, and then those meaning-based skills as well, vocabulary and comprehension. And then leaders were asked to align their literacy instructional vision to their overall vision for their buildings and for teaching and learning within their schools. So there was the learning, the background knowledge that was aligned to the standards, and then there was the focus on application. We know that teachers' specialized knowledge in the science of reading is a critical ingredient for pushing student literacy outcomes, but by itself, it's not enough. So you could increase your knowledge, but if you don't change your practices, it's not going to impact student outcomes differently. And so we focused on building that common knowledge, but immediately turning it over into application. And so what I want to do today is take you through 6 principles, enduring understandings that we have worked to build within the leaders and the teachers, everyone who has a hand in pushing student literacy outcomes in the 3 mastery schools that are a part of this big research study. And so I'm going to go through each of the principles. I encourage you to note them down, but they're all going to be in the leave behinds for you. And be thinking about which of these principles are more familiar to you, like they're more a part of the instruction that you provide to students, and then which principles might be an opportunity for you to upgrade your instruction that you might not be aware of or doing yet, but that you could use in order to further increase your students' literacy learning. So the first principle is that instructional practices are aligned to how the brain learns literacy. And analogy that I like to think of is this Mustang here. So if I'm to own this car and drive this car, I need to know some basic information about how to start the car and how to take basic care of it. But if there's something that needs deeper intervention, then just adding in a little windshield wiper fluid here or there, right? If there's something that needs deeper intervention, I go to someone who's an expert who knows the ins and outs of the car. They know all the parts, all of the machinery that's underneath the hood, and they know exactly if there's something wrong with the engine, that we're going to do this further diagnostic testing to figure out exactly what's wrong, and then we'll fix it accordingly. We're not going to use an intervention that isn't aligned. We're not going to just kind of throw an intervention at the problem and hope that it works out. The mechanic, who's an expert in what's going on underneath the hood, is going to be very targeted about figuring out what needs attention, and then provide that attention in an aligned way. And so as we think about being teachers of literacy, this analogy is useful because while our students don't necessarily need to know all of the parts of the brain and how literacy is acquired, they do need to be taught the skills that are going to make them strong readers. We need to explicitly teach those skills. But if we are to do that, we need to have a little bit of an awareness about how the brain acquires literacy acquisition. That's the way we're going to be able to implement brain-based interventions. So if we know that the phonological processing happens here in that left inferior frontal gyrus. We know that this is the area where context and meaning are being processed. And then back here in the brain's letterbox, that's where orthography, the symbols of our language that represent the sounds, that that's where the brain lights up when there's reading happening. So if we know these basic parts underneath the hood, if you will, and then more importantly, what that means for instruction, how the brain acquires literacy, then we can provide brain compatible ways of not only effectively leading students to literacy proficiency, but efficiently leading them there as well, so that they can experience success and continue to elevate their skills. The second principle is that oral language is the foundation for written language. And so what this means is that our students are going to come to us with strengths in oral language. There is a lot of, they're going to have those skills that they bring because they've been learning those skills since they were born or before they were born. This is Avia. She's my little kid, and she's 2, and she is learning oral language skills right now. And what we don't have to do is say, all right, Avia, it's time for your oral language lesson. Come sit down. I'm going to get my materials and my lesson plan. We don't have to do any of that. Avia is learning oral language because she is exposed to it. And so that's a big difference between oral and written language. Oral language is learned implicitly. We talk to Avia. She hears us talking. When she talks, we listen and react accordingly. And just through that exposure over and over again, she is learning the sounds of the languages she's exposed to. She's learning new vocabulary every day, and she's learning the word order. She's definitely learning the pragmatics of our language. So she's got the facial expressions, the hand gestures. So she's learning all of this incidentally, right? Through just implicit exposure. But again, learning literacy is very different. We know that through explicit instruction, students, the majority of students can attain high levels of literacy proficiency. We just have to provide that instruction in an explicit and systematic way, which I'll talk more about in a moment. But the implications for instruction here are that because oral language is the foundation for written language, we can draw from students' strengths in oral language and explicitly connect those to the written language skills that we're teaching them. It's also worthwhile to continue to provide students with practice and reinforce the strengths that they already have through our instruction. So doing, vocabulary, word consciousness building activities throughout the day, every day, right? Talking about the structure of our language. If we want students to be able to write a complete sentence, they necessarily have to be able to speak a complete sentence first. And so before we give students an opportunity to write, giving them the chance to verbalize what they would like to communicate, and then adding on the layer of writing down what their thought is. When we want students to learn the foundations of language comprehension that they're going to be able to apply to reading, we want to make sure that that's the reason that we do read alouds, right? We want students to have that practice with listening comprehension that can then be leveraged, right? That strength can be applied to reading comprehension, which is that much more complex and layered. So each of these principles we could talk about for many, many, many hours, but I'm being very brief here and just want you to have a taste of those enduring understandings, and again, be thinking about what it is that already aligns with your practice and where there's opportunities for growth. The next principle is that students are taught literacy skills explicitly and systematically. They're taught through modeling and thinking aloud, and then the responsibility is gradually released to students. Guided practice involves lots of targeted, specific feedback for students, and so that explicit instruction happens for any given literacy domain. And this teaching also happens systematically. So we're using scope and sequences that are designed to have more common and simpler skills taught earlier on, and then the more complex and less common skills build on top of that. But so this is how we teach, explicitly and systematically. What do we teach in those ways? All of the literacy skills that fall under word recognition and language comprehension. We're building students' knowledge of the code of our English language and their comprehension of language, because when those all come together, when each of these strands of the reading rope are strong and they're tightly woven together, that's how that rope that represents skilled reading is going to be as strong as it can. So we ultimately want to get our students to be able to recognize words on sight. When I'm reading this, fluent execution and coordination of word recognition and text comprehension, I'm not decoding. As a proficient reader, I was recognizing those words on sight within a matter of milliseconds. But that, because we as adults have that experience of being able to recognize words on sight, that doesn't mean that our students are going to be able to do that. We want to get them there, but we have to go slow to go fast. And so we start at the foundation. We work with sounds. We teach students to manipulate the different sounds that make up our language. And then we layer the letters on top of that. So that way we're connecting the symbols to a really strong foundation of sounds. And so you can think about it, if I am not able to blend the sounds r, e, d into the word read, then I'm certainly not going to be able to look at this word, connect each symbol to the sounds, and say that it says read. Right. So again, oral language is the foundation of written language, which is why our explicit instruction rolls out in such a systematic way. Aside from the word recognition skills, we are also focused on language comprehension, and there are several subdomains of language comprehension. Again, we are teaching each of these skills discretely, but ultimately we are teaching students to execute these in a strategic way and in a coordinated way so that it contributes to skilled reading. I'd invite you to type into the chat, which of these areas of the reading rope would you say that you're most focused on in your instruction across time? Are you mostly in the word recognition strands, the language comprehension strands, and maybe even there's a particular thread here that you're focused on? I'd love to get a quick sense of where you're at with that. All right, I'm seeing word recognition, decoding, phonological awareness, and that's really great. You can see that those are critical parts of learning to read. And then be thinking about how do we, again, upgrade our practice so that all of these skills are being addressed in just as intentional and thorough of a way. Instructional decisions are rooted in data, thinking about that analogy with the car, right? If there's an issue that involves the oil, putting in wiper fluid is not going to make any difference. And so really ensuring that the reading instructional decisions and intervention decisions that we make are aligned to the root cause. Another quick analogy, if you have a fever and you go to a doctor and they say, oh, you have a fever, just take Tylenol. That's not a very good doctor because they didn't look into the root causes of your fever. If they find that it's a common cold versus that it's an ear infection, I would hope that they would have different interventions that they'd recommend. So if it is an ear infection, we need an antibiotic, right? But if it's not, then that intervention is not appropriate and it's not a good use of resources. So just being really targeted. If a student, you might have 4 different students in a classroom who are having difficulty with comprehension, but it might turn out that only one of them has a primary issue with comprehension and another student might be reading accurately, but they're reading so slow that by the time they get to the end of a sentence, they've forgotten what they read. And so it might not be that the reading comprehension issue is the root cause. That's how it's manifesting, but it's actually an issue with reading with fluency. Reading and writing instruction are coordinated. And so that goes for connections between the sounds and symbols of our language, right? These are windows into, these spelling errors are windows into the student's current understanding of how our language structure works. And so if we know that, the student is trying to write, King George is unfair, he should not tax the colonists because they did not agree. They said no taxation without representation, right? That student has a lot to say about this topic, and yet we're also getting a window into the fact that the student is not representing the sounds correctly in their writing sample, and then this lets us know exactly the types of interventions we can provide to support that student. So we do coordinate reading and writing at the level of decoding and spelling, but even at those higher levels. So for example, if we are teaching compound sentences, we're going to very explicitly teach the components of a compound sentence, but then we want students to hear examples, say examples, read and write examples of compound sentences so that they get a full understanding of that concept, and also work in the realm of writing reinforces reading and vice versa. And finally, literacy skills are taught across content areas. So whether we're talking about teaching vocabulary before we do a read aloud, or we're teaching vocabulary during math class, we are introducing students to the sound, how the word sounds and how many syllables, and maybe there's a morpheme, right? Maybe there's a little piece of meaning that the students have learned, and they can draw connections to that word. They're hearing examples, they're talking about examples, they're writing with that word in their written expression. So this could happen, again, literacy block or math class. We could be talking about inferencing and practicing inferencing in social studies or science. So all day long, there are opportunities to work with language and with literacy. And one of these enduring principles is that we are never missing an opportunity to continue to push students' literacy skills. So this is the full set of principles that we very quickly reviewed. And what I am going to ask in the breakout is that you take an opportunity to connect and extend and think about challenges to what we've talked about. So this is a thinking routine for drawing connections to new ideas and prior knowledge that was developed by Project Zero at Harvard's Graduate School of Education. So in the chat, I've pasted the questions, but certainly your breakout room leaders are going to, facilitate conversation in whatever direction you'd like to go. And with that said, you know what? I will paste the principles into the chat as well for you. And so with that said, I thank you for your time. I'm going to ensure that the breakout room leaders have the questions and the principles so that that discussion can be facilitated. Really appreciate you all.
Hi, do you know how we ended up together?
No, but hi, good morning. They kicked us out of the I thought we were just going back to the meet. I mean, to the meet room.
Me too. But
Hi, girls.
The thing is that everybody is on their way back in. I'm not sure how that works.
Yes,
but
we're all
it
coming
happened
back
to me. Yeah,
together
there you
again.
go.
Yes, here we are.
okay, can
Welcome
you put
back,
up that
everybody.
last slide with the 7 ideas you discussed? Did Saruchi discuss before she ended, please?
And these will be in the leave behinds that we'll provide through the platform. But if you want to take a quick screenshot, here it is.
All right, so we're going to transition, and I hope your breakout session was as productive and fruitful as mine was. There was a colleague of ours who's here today named Patricia, who got cut off right at the end, but was really thinking about, where do we start with this? And I'm so grateful for that question. So as we're transitioning into the next section of our learning together today, certainly bring some of those conversation moments that you had in the breakout room to this next session, and it'll all align. So I want to first say good morning. It's great to see everyone here on a Saturday morning. My name is Christina Grayson. I am currently Assistant Director of Early Literacy for Mastery Charter Schools. And I'm a language and literacy specialist by training. I have had the pleasure of working in New Orleans, where much of my family is from, in the 9th Ward, in Boston Public Schools as an inclusion teacher of K-2, and specifically focusing on students who, for whatever reason, are experiencing some challenges in acquiring their literacy. And I've also taught kindergarten and first grade. Most of my interventions have been with first graders and second graders. Lots of linguistically diverse, culturally diverse, neurodiverse students. And there's nothing I love more than sitting next to a kid who is learning about mapping their oral language onto written language. So I'm excited to be here today to talk to you about culturally responsive teaching and the science of reading together, and where do they really align. I'm gonna go ahead and go into presenter mode, and this talk is called Culturally Responsive Teaching, the Science of Reading in the Brain. But I do have to admit that I had a working title at first of Silver Bullets, Lead Balloons, and Lizards. And before you start scratching your head too much, I'll come back to it. But where I want us to start is with a first word. So I want you to think to what your first word was. If you have a niece or a nephew or children, you might be thinking about what their first word was. But let's take a moment to just pop into the chat. What was your first word or their first word? See the chat filling up. Dada, mama, up, boots. Interesting, Elizabeth. And whatever your first word was, or whoever's first word that was, it had to be something meaningful. I'm seeing no from one person, and that certainly is meaningful. And if you provided the first word of a loved one and you witnessed it, you were certainly present for a moment of brilliance. I'm sure you felt the thrill. And when you said your first word, someone thought you were brilliant, and they were absolutely right. So what I wanted to, now that we've started with those first words, I want to draw our attention to this quote, which comes from Louis Yacob, who's an Iraqi-American anthropologist. I'm going to give you 30 seconds to read it silently. And if you have a notepad or a place on your computer, just jot down what is resonating with you. So what might be standing out to you, and what stood out to me the first time I saw this, was really talking about language. We're starting with language, and it is the beginning and as the beginning and end of what makes us human. The significance of language. Language as a home, Katie puts into the chat, right? And also language as being active. This is something that we do. Language is about culture and connection. When you said that first word, or when your child said their first word, they were trying to convey something meaningful to someone else that they felt connected to. I saw squirrel in the chat as a first word, and I feel like that would also be my dog's first word if they could talk, right? Because they're super interested in it. But it's fundamental to our humanity, and language, hearing words, hearing our loved ones speaking, it starts before we are born. Language is so powerful, and it's musical, and it's certainly an aspect of culture, right? So I want you to take a look at this potentially familiar image of a common analogy about culture. And when we're talking about this, how we're thinking about it requires us to go deeper than how culture is often connoted in public conversation about culturally responsive teaching. It can often be talked about as, culturally responsive teaching, like, we're bringing the kids like culture into the classroom. So that means like dance and art and music. I see Elizabeth Sierra like nodding her head. And really, you can find a ton of cute activities online for surface culture and, related to food or clothing, but it's the deep culture that speaks to our humanity, and that's where language falls. Let's go ahead and take a look, again, thinking about that first word. Take a look at this quote by Canadian-American cognitive psychologist and psycholinguistic Steven Pinker. He's talking about language too, and let's see what he has to say. Think about what resonates for you. And so let's again, we're thinking about language still, but this is a different way of thinking about language, right? And it's often that, as humans, we think that that literacy is something that we're automatically wired for, written language, but we're not. And it's not natural. It's not inherent to us. Even if it feels like it came naturally to you or something that someone that you know, it is an optional accessory, which now in our current world, it's a necessary accessory. It is a right almost in some conversations that must be painstakingly bolted on. And so we have this understanding of language that Suruchi offered to us, that it is a brain-based activity. It is inherent to us. We are wired for sound and speaking and listening, but we're not necessarily wired for print. And we have these different parts of the brain that are oriented already towards building on that literacy. That yellow piece in the front is like wired for sound. That green in the middle is wired for meaning. And the red in the back, which becomes the brain's letterbox, where we store all the letters and the combinations, it's actually being repurposed from being initially, like as humans were wired in that area to recognize faces and objects. So as we're thinking about at Mastery, evidence-based instruction, and we have these student teachers who are coming to us, and we're trying to move our practices. You can see that there can sometimes be a tension between how do we prepare teachers to teach reading and writing, and it can sometimes feel like a tug of war or professional or public conversation that's posited as either or, this or that, a one ring to rule them all. And sometimes, just like many districts, it can be the silver bullet approach can be true of how we've been thinking about things, that we're looking to reduce complexity and just find that one single answer. One thing that we've been doing at Mastery since at least 2019, I've been working here since 2019, is that we've really been studying Zaretta Hammond's framework for culturally responsive teaching related to the brain and how the brain learns. In the 2020-2021 school year, the whole network read Zaretta's book. That means from our CEO down to a pair of professionals, we read the book, so we have a common understanding of what we mean by culturally responsive teaching. And many teachers and school leaders, myself included, have been in a professional learning community with Zaretta herself. We're also thinking about Cultivating Genius by Gholdy Muhammad, and thinking about the historically responsive literacy pursuits that Gholdy offers us. Not just skill development. I know that Katie made a reference earlier to the standards, but identity development, intellectualism, criticality, and joy. And it's not joy that we postpone until you're proficient. It's joy right now that you're bringing to the table. So as we're thinking about whether one is a silver bullet, we might also be thinking about what's holding us back from taking off that one single lead balloon. Is it and there's always something new. Is it grit? Is it the Common Core standards? Is it STEM education? Is it whole language? Is it explicit phonics? And we have, again, like some more complex inputs coming in from our partners. As we learn more, we're trying to do better, especially as we're thinking about not only our students, but our student teachers. And so you might sense that it feels a little bit like this. Which one is it? Is it science of reading, or is it culturally responsive teaching? And that's where that lizard brain comes in. That part of our brain known as the limbic system formerly, that's like in fight or flight or freeze. And as professionals, we all want to do right by kids. And there can be fear in trying to figure out what is the right thing to do. How do we stay safe, and how do we also keep our kids safe from constant change? So when we're thinking about the reading brain, we're also thinking about the amygdala and that feeder section of the brain. But the honest thing is that my lizard brain that is, going in a bunch of different directions, and as a teacher, as a coach, is giving your lizard brain a hug. Right? When we're thinking about brain-based education, it's not really about science of reading versus culturally responsive teaching. It's how do we have these things working together? And the way that we do that is to understand that language and the brain are the coin. Culturally responsive teaching and science of reading are the two sides of that same coin. The coin is that human brain's capacity for language. So when we're thinking about our equity commitments to anti-racism and culturally responsive education, they're congruent with science of reading and evidence-based practices, because language is the connective tissue between CRT and SOR. You've seen that we are thinking about all these various inputs. It's not just, I have to have the right curriculum. It's not just that we need to have professional development. There's many inputs to come in. And then also that we're not throwing out culturally responsive teaching. We're not throwing out our anti-racist frameworks. It's that all of these things together are necessary for our kids to really get the equitable education and access that they are entitled to. And so really thinking about where to start, it's not that culturally responsive teaching is another arm or an input. It is the foundation for all of the work that we do. And so as education professionals, the charge right now, and to Patricia's question of where do I start with this? Education professionals, we need to start embracing scientific intellectual curiosity about children as information processing, language using cultural beings. And that's true of our high schoolers, it's true of our fifth graders, it's also true of our preschoolers and our kindergartners. They're complex beings. And so what I'd like for you to do right now is jot down the name of a student who you find to be complex. Individual children are unique and complex beings. They have individual strengths. And so let's set an attention about a kid that you're curious about. Maybe you're stumped about what to do with them, and really who challenges you to grow and learn as a professional. And you might be thinking about all the things that this kid can't do. But the first place to start is to really start with the joy and the genius. All of our kids have it. And instead of starting with a deficit mindset around, well, they don't have this or that, like we have to be able to really ground ourselves and think about what do they have that they're bringing to the table. This is a former student of mine who remains my complex student who taught me a lot. Her name is Lucky, and I specifically chose an image of her outside the classroom. She's 12 now, but when she was my student, she was 6, turning 7. She was a big sister. I'm very proud of it. She had siblings who were 5 and 1 and would just talk about them all the time. She loved ocean animals. So this field trip to the aquarium was perfect for her. I was trying to, introduce the idea and concept of being a marine biologist and what that meant. And her mother has lived in the US since she was 13, but she originally came from Somalia. And so as we're thinking about where do we start, we have our complex child in mind, and the National Equity Project, with whom Mastery is also engaged extensively, offers us some liberatory design mindsets. Practicing self-awareness and embracing complexity is fundamentally important to this work. And when we're starting to embrace that complexity, coming back to the science of reading and what it actually means. In public discourse right now, it can also often be reduced to like worksheets and phonics and decodable books. But really the science of reading is about pulling together 40 plus years of research from cognitive psychology and neuroscience and linguistics and communication sciences about how the brain learns to read and write and why some students have difficulty with that. So our kindergarten teachers, our first grade teachers are talented disciplinarians of all of these different areas. And then putting it next to what we understand about culturally responsive teaching being about undoing the inequitable outcomes that have happened because schools have been designed to undermine the natural competence of diverse students and underdevelop their cognitive processing skills. So again, coming back to the brain and understanding that CRT and SOR are two sides of the same coin, thinking about our complex student, we can use this as a framework for thinking about how to pull together science of reading and culturally responsive to be very equitable for our students. This is the Ready for Rigor framework offered by Zaretta Hammond. And I'm going to pop into the chat. This leave behind is also going to be put up on the website. But you can see that Zaretta offers us 4 very diverse and different domains on which to focus, with the thrust being that students right now, whether they're kindergartners who know all their letters or first graders or second graders who are learning English for the first time and speak in 1 to 2 word sentences, are ready for rigor and independent learning when we pay attention to these things. The point being that we're moving students from being dependent learners to independent learners. And how do we actually get started with that? Number 1 is being aware of your own cultural lens and then understanding how the brain works. broadening your interpretation of culturally and linguistically diverse students and learning behaviors. And so I want you to think about those principles that Suruchi offered us about how the principles of the science of reading, and see the connection there, right? Understanding how the brain works, and really thinking about how are we starting with that oral language to understand our students as a foundation. Those instructional practices are aligned with how the brain learns literacy. They're congruent. And oral language is the foundation for written language. So when I think about Lucky, she's a student that was not coded as an ELL. She didn't have an ELD level. But something that I needed to know and understand about her is that she was hearing 3 languages at home: English, Spanish, and Somali. And so thinking about all of those systems, I had to be aware of like how she's hearing a lot of different sounds. Let's keep on going. Another place to think about where to start is information processing. And I really want to draw attention down at the bottom to something that Zaretta offers us, but was not included here. And my colleagues and I thought, this is something that's really important. Errors is information, right? It's not about right or wrong. It's about how close is it and what is the thinking that got you there. So when we're thinking about data, what our students do, how they do it, not whether it's accurate or inaccurate, really digging into the way that they're processing is how we are culturally responsive to them. This is an example of a writing sample from in response to A Color of His Own. The chameleon don't want to change color. I appreciate that this student didn't let accuracy get in the way of expressing what they understood, and we get a lot of information about what the student understands about the orthography connected to the sounds. Same with the example that Suruchi offered to us earlier, which is one of my absolute favorites. I can really hear this kid. They said no taxation without representation. And so their voice is not being diluted, but we also get a lot of information about what they understand about orthography and where do I need to intervene next. Again, it's connecting about the brain. The third place being learning partnerships and giving kids a sense of self-efficacy, even if they're not quite at that point of proficiency. They have things to work with, but they need to know what they are already doing well so that they can continue to do more of it. So often we give feedback around what the kid isn't doing, and we don't affirm what they are already doing well, so they discard those behaviors. And reimagining that our teaching is about a partnership. I really appreciated that Lucky was a very reciprocal child, kind of remarkable for her age, where she would initiate conversation about books. She wouldn't wait for me to ask questions. She'd close the book and have some sort of comment about it. She really saw us as partners, and that built up a lot of her confidence. I didn't want to, with her proficiency being lower than where we would want it to be. That's why she was with me as an interventionist. I wanted to make sure that I'm also like reaffirming the things that she does well. And so thinking again about how those skills are taught explicitly and systematically and rooted in data, making sure that kids have room to make those errors. This child was writing about a book called My Librarian as a Camel, and asked how do they use mindset if they do not have books. And the idea is really valuable there. But the thing to also think about is that this is a child who asked their teacher how to spell every single word that they didn't know, and the teacher wrote it down for them, and then they copied it. They wanted to make sure that the teacher wanted to make sure that not knowing how to spell the words didn't get in the way of them recording the ideas. But we also don't have that window, as Suruchi was saying, into what their processing was for the words themselves. So how do we balance that? Same thing here. It's not about is it right or wrong, it's how close is it. Not only did this child express their idea, but they showed what they understood and gave gave their teacher a window to make that partnership stronger. And then finally, the community of learners and learner environment, creating an environment that is intellectually safe and making space for student agency. So you see that here, not being afraid of their big words. And when I think about Lucky, she would really be like engaged as an intellectual. So sometimes she would turn to me and say dogs, like I'm writing the word dogs. I think that word has a suffix S. What do you think, right? And so we were engaging in this intellectual conversation about small things, maybe, but that it was still really that she was an active participant. So thinking about where to start, Zaretta offers us, like, you know, for our planning, sometimes we think about like what we're doing on Monday morning. And I'm asking us to start with, instead of what am I teaching today, to start with that joy and the genius and go for with that complex student, who am I learning or learning for today? What am I learning about my students as unique information processing, language using readers and writers today? What are they learning about themselves? And embracing both the science of reading and culturally responsive teaching to really employ evidence-based knowledge judiciously, flexibly, and joyfully. Ultimately, we're spinning that coin that is the language in the brain. And of course, the coin is going to topple on one side or the other. But the point is that we keep trying to get up and spin it one more time. So I thank you for your attention here. And I know there's been lots of conversation in the chat, but let's go into breakout rooms and really think about the connections, the extensions, and the challenges here. You might use, I used to think, now I think.
So I think we have everybody back now. We are going to take a short break, give everybody a little stretch, and we're going to meet back here at 11:15. So if you need to run and get another cup of coffee, use the restroom, please take some time to do that, and we'll meet back together at 11:15. Thanks, everybody.
Folks, thank you so much for your engagement. I think we're on a stretch break right now until 11:15. We'll get started again. So if you want to go camera off, we will still be in this Zoom room and come back for Dr. Gobbley's conversation about a whole comprehensive system at 11:15.
Hi, Erica. I moved everyone into breakout, so it'll be just us here so you could do your test.
Cool. How are you this morning?
Good. How are you?
Oh, well, thanks. Make sure I have good light and everything. And then let's try this out really quickly. That's showing up for you?
Yeah, looks good.
All right, then I think we're great. Just wanted to do a quick little test. So that feels good.
Awesome.
All right. Thank you so much. I'll see
No
you
problem.
soon.
Sounds good.
All right.
Right.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us. I just want to let you know we're taking a little stretch break. We will be back together at 11:15. So take a minute, get another cup of coffee, take a chance to use the restroom, and we will all come back together at 11:15. All right, well, it is 11:15. I'm gonna call everybody back. Again, we appreciate you for joining us on a Saturday morning for our third annual Helen Oaks Literacy Institute. We hope you'll stick around. We have an amazing keynote from Erica Snowden coming up, but now I will turn it back over to Jacqueline.
Hi, good morning, everybody.
Can you give me your phone to Brady?
Sorry. I'm trying to manage too many things.
Oop, you're on mute.
Okay, can everybody see my screen? Let me put it in PowerPoint. Okay, so thank you so much for staying and being here on this beautiful Saturday morning. I and feel so blessed to be here with all of you working with teachers. I consider myself a teacher. Still, I started off working with students who had moderate to severe language-based learning disabilities. I am the mom of 3 boys you may hear in the background, but they are my inspiration. So one of my sons is dyslexic and working to improve literacy practices across for equitable access for effective literacy instruction for all students is really a passion for me. And I feel honored to work with the best team with Saruchi, Nancy, and Christina and the mastery teachers doing the work that I've always dreamed was possible. So I'm excited to share that with you guys today. So the title of my portion of this is the Dynamic Early Literacy Framework, which is the tool that we have developed to help guide a process of systemic change. This change needs to happen. So the next portion is disrupting the cycle of inequitable access to effective literacy instruction. And I really see this as a public health crisis for our nation at large. So I want to just start off with the quote that a system is perfectly designed to achieve the results that it gets. So this is a quote that is attributed to Arthur Deming, but really thinking about how our school systems are designed to get what the outcomes that we're getting. When we look at our nation's reading scores, we have about 66% of our students struggling to learn to read at a proficient rate. This was the data taken from the National Assessments of Educational Progress. This was a 2% decline from 2017. This was obviously pre-COVID. And so we have estimates that there is at a minimum of a 30% decline as a result of COVID on its own. This is going to be interesting to see the next iteration of this. Philadelphia in particular is performing lower than other large cities across the country. So we only have 17% of Philadelphia students that are reading at or above proficient rates, which is unacceptable. So we as teachers have to have the courage to learn and to change. And I think Christina really touched upon the idea that we have to be vulnerable to admit what we know and what we don't know and what we need to change. That's going to really be an opening to empower that change, so that as we as teachers and educators, as well as school systems in and of itself, because the current design is not working. So when we look at this, the current literacy system cycle, we have, starting off, we've historically had inadequate teacher preparation programming. So by and large, I know, speaking for myself, and I'd love to ask all of you, if you felt that your pre-service teaching really prepared you to meet the needs of your students. So if you could give me a thumbs up or a middle or a thumbs down. I know I was definitely a thumbs down. And I really consider my program to be one of the better programs. So seeing a lot of thumbs down. We're in good company. So where that's really left us as teachers is that we need to then figure out how we're going to meet the needs of our students with spending a lot of time and resources on our own to develop those skills and abilities. And that is not sustainable or effective or efficient. The next step in this process, I aspire to be as nimble as Christina is on Zoom, but I'm not quite there yet. We focus, as Nancy kind of discussed, as part of the Read by Fourth network of higher institutions of higher ed to really focus on how we could improve inadequate teacher preparation programming. So we really wanted to disrupt this current literacy cycle. Oh, let me go back for 1 second. I apologize. So we have those pre-service teachers, then they go into in-service teachers just like yourselves, who have low content knowledge and low proficiency on some of those cognitive-based strategies that we really need to know that are really going to enable us to be efficient and effective and targeted in developing students' need, regardless of the characteristics of that students. So whether they have they're classified as in special education or not, whether they are coming from a well-resourced school or not, whether they had the best early childhood education possible or not. We need to have the best knowledge and skills available to meet those needs. What that leads to overall is an acceptance of a system that has unacceptable outcomes. So for about 60% of the population, we really need that systematic and explicit instruction. I know that we hear those words a lot, but I think, my students, my graduate students and undergraduate students, when I ask them to really explain what that means, it's challenging. So what does that look like? What does systematic and explicit actually look like? So I hope by the end of this, you can get a sense of where I'm going with that. But I think just kind of starting there, when we say systematic or explicit, what does that actually mean? And what does that look like in the classroom systems that we are working with? When we have that acceptance of a system, the status quo is reinforced, and the appetite for system and infrastructure change to support a science of reading aligned instructional system remains low. So I know in my breakout groups, someone shared, I think it was Helen, I think that you shared that there's a lot of data that is taken, that is mandated by the district. But that data doesn't really, get fed back to the teachers. The teachers don't have a way to really utilize that information to create targeted and explicit instruction in a systematic way. Those resources are not there. So thinking about what are the time, the resources, the collaborative capabilities that your school affords you to be able to make use of that data. And those are some of those systemic things that we need to think about changing in order to support the science of reading to be effective in our schools. So then after all of that, I then have my pre-service teachers who need to go into the field and learn from amazing teachers like yourselves. But they're not learning things that are necessarily best practice or in alignment with what we know that the cognitive science says about how students, what they need to do to be able to learn how to read. So as Nancy discussed in her conversation, we really focus on how to improve that inadequate teacher preparation as a starting place for this cycle. So in at St. Joe's, we started, in 2012, we got our IDA accreditation for our graduate program. In 2019, we expanded that IDA accreditation. One thing if some of you are working with students who have dyslexia, then this might, be okay with you. These standards were developed by the best cognitive and literacy experts in the field. And a lot of that literature that tells us about how the brain learns how to read came out of comparing dyslexic readers versus typical readers, to really sort of identify what's the most efficient way that we can teach these students. So these standards are not only applicable to teaching students with dyslexia. I consider these standards to be mandatory and essential for any students, particularly any early elementary teachers, for them to have the awareness of this knowledge. But certainly, as someone shared in my breakout group, as fifth grade students, sixth grade students, we have students still continuing to struggle to read all the way through high school as well. We're really excited to expand our IDA accreditation into our undergraduate program. So we have our dual certified early childhood general education teachers. They're certified for pre-K to 4, and then our special educators certified for pre-K to 12 beginning in January. They are coming out with the first level of the IDA accreditation. Our graduate programs then offer that IDA accreditation plus, which includes that practicum experience with the student. And they also have their Wilson certification there. So looking back into this cycle, we disrupted the cycle by putting into place high quality IDA accredited science of reading undergraduate programming. So we are feeling really good about the content knowledge that our teachers are coming out with, but that is not enough. Okay, they need to understand content knowledge alone is not going to fix the issue, because there is a lot to teaching. There's a lot we have to pay attention to, and there's a lot of systems, routines, infrastructure that is needed to support that. So we knew we were sending our teachers out to observe practices that were not in alignment. And so that was the genesis of creating this model. So we worked with, knew that we had to increase the content knowledge of the leadership and the teacher. So leaderships are key points here. If the leadership is not on board, not a lot of progress is going to be made within a school. We also knew that we were going to have to develop system analysis and change at the school level while we have that new teacher pipeline. So it's really exciting for my student teachers who are at our Mastery field site schools to be part of this progress. They feel really empowered to share the content knowledge that they have. And they're used to feeling vulnerable and asking good questions about, like, I don't know how to make this work. I don't know what the next step is. I don't know how to really come up with a targeted objective that's going to meet this need. So through these inputs, we are developing an increasingly quality aligned science of reading instructional system. And that has benefits for the student literacy proficiency and our new teacher proficiency. By enacting this model, we've then disrupted that cycle at various points. Through the pathways coursework that Suruchi discussed, the in-service teachers and leaders got their own IDA accredited science of reading professional development programming. And through the process of having that content knowledge and engaging in a process of strategic inquiry, which I will discuss shortly, this motivates change for the teachers that we're working with. And then we're addressing the resources that are needed to support a system and the infrastructure needed to support a science of reading aligned system. So not just taking and accepting the status quo and really thinking about what are the obstacles to enabling our students to become independent, successful learners. And then our pre-service teachers are going in to their field sites and replicating evidence-based practices, and they're observing systems and infrastructure that is needed for science of reading. So they're not going to just go into a classroom for their first year of work. They're going to know what's possible when changes can be made. And knowing what's possible, I think, will encourage them to be change agents there. So rather than a cycle, we sort of see this as a spiral because simultaneously through the processes that we'll discuss today, we're increasing the capacity for schools and for teachers to meet the individual needs of our students. So while I say all this, grand sweeping changes are not likely to be sustainable nor successful. So if we try to bite off more than we can chew at one point in time, it is likely not going to succeed or be sustainable. So we really are focusing on making small changes in high leverage areas. We are creating this systemic change through strategic inquiry across 7 interrelated drivers, which I'm going to briefly go over with you. And that really constitutes what our DELF driver, our DELF tool is. And our DELF tool stands for Dynamic Early Literacy Framework. So these 7 interrelated drivers are leadership and culture. We place that first because we see that as a gatekeeper. If the leaders of the school are not willing to be vulnerable to the process of that their school is not doing everything perfectly and that there aren't improvements to be made, then this process will not go very far. So leadership and culture is situated first. Assessment, data, and analysis is our second driver there. This is an evidence-based process, and for that we need data. Curricula, tools, so we need those to be evidence-based, as well as our instructional practices. Supervision and evaluation is another driver. Professional development and coaching, and family and community engagement are critical elements to this as well. Throughout this process, we situate the student as the unit of change and analysis. And we're going to engage in macro and micro inquiry at macro and micro levels, but always keeping the student at the forefront of our minds. So what is strategic inquiry? Strategic inquiry is the process by which school stakeholder teams systematically study the school through the lens of struggling students and removes obstacles to the students' success. So there are a lot of logistical hurdles. So one of the teachers in my breakout session discussed her struggling, 2 students who were really struggling to learn their letter names. But from a logistical standpoint, she is unable to pull them for 10 or 15 minutes a day to work on this skill. So thinking about what are some of those logistical hurdles that need to be changed. So the DELF is our guide. It is not a checklist or a prescriptive list of things to do. We're going to leave behind the DELF in the leave behinds that will be on the website. And I hope that you review that, but also knowing that you yourself as an individual teacher will be able to impact change for your students, but you will need to enlist some system level partners to really get the ball moving in a wider scope. I like this map idea because there are multiple routes to get to one place. So the school needs to chart the course that is tailored to the unique characteristics of the student population, the faculty, and the school culture. While I think many would just prefer, can I have just what is it that I need to do? Where do I need to start? What do I need to do? What do I do next? But the reality is every school is different. Every child is different. Every classroom is different. Every teacher is different. So if we don't enact a system of change that respects the school that we're in while challenging the status quo within that system, it's not going to be effective. So it really needs to be tailored to the individual site. And the process by creating that course is really the product that comes out of this process. So we have these 7 drivers across 4 growth stages. So we use this tool to kind of monitor where we are in the process. School reform and school improvement cycles that have a guide or a map are more effective as people know where they are in the process and can monitor their progress throughout that. So schools will engage in a self-study guided with outside individuals to identify where they are in each of these drivers, beginning at emerging and moving to optimizing. In the Nancy and I's experience, so this is the tool that Nancy and I created, all of the schools, for the most part, are operating at an emerging stage in almost all of the drivers when we begin working with them. So within the leadership and culture, we have 3 sub-drivers, which include literacy vision statement, literacy improvement plan, and scaffolding and staffing and scheduling. Can everybody hear me? Because I'm frozen on my screen. So, okay. So what is that literacy vision statement? This is a guiding statement reflecting school-wide commitment to equitable access to evidence-based effective literacy instruction for all students. So by creating this literacy vision statement, that is going to be the mechanism by which all other initiatives are marked against to make sure that it is in alignment. In education, that idea of the pendulum swinging is all too familiar. So we'll have one thing put into place and then quickly move to another when we don't see progress as quickly as we would like. We need to make sure that we're staying true to that literacy vision statement and know that this is a multi-year process. This is not going to happen overnight. And so we need that guiding light. So I'd like for all of you to just check in. Are any of you aware of a literacy specific vision or mission statement that is available to you at your school? Thumbs up if you have a literacy vision statement, thumbs down if you do not. Okay, so I'm seeing Christina with a thumbs up, which is exciting to see, but Michelle has a thumbs up. Sierra is saying no, so I'm seeing a lot of thumbs down for that. So that is something that we can definitely work on developing. The second factor, second subdriver is that multi-year literacy improvement plan. This we'll discuss more at the end of this conversation. This is one of the last things that really develops out of the initial phases of the DELF. But it starts by starting small and then going big. So we'll begin with pilot improvement cycles that will help us build familiarity and trust. They will develop skill and strategic inquiry among teachers and leaders. They will identify resource gaps and redundancies and incrementally build capacity. It also provides proof of concept for the faculty at large. So we have an improvement cycle going on at Mastery right now that I will describe to you. But this is, seems like a low stakes way to enlist these colleagues to really make sizable changes to their instructional practices. The third element of this leadership and culture driver, is staffing and scheduling. So it is critical that we have the ability to create homogeneous, flexible groupings so that we can maximize resources. So it's helpful if we can have common instructional time across homerooms in a given grade band, because these groupings need to be responsive and dynamic so that differentiation can occur. But when we provide differentiated instruction, and that necessitates frequent changes in student groupings. So it is very unlikely that we would have a group of 25 or 30 students, I would say impossible, that would all be moving at the same pace through many of the specific skills that we need to get them to develop to become proficient readers. So some students have the neuronal highway structure that are going to move really fast and they're going to be speeding at 80 miles an hour. And other students have a slower speed limit. It's going to take them longer. They're going to need more time, more doses of specific intervention and instruction to be able to be responsive to that. But we do know that 95% of all individuals can learn how to read. So I want to just raise that up. A lot of times we're accepting, this student isn't going to learn how to read, or this student came to me like this. I urge you to kind of reject, those obstacles and just move with urgency on anything that you can do to increase the students' skills, even in a small way. This also requires increased data collection, entry, and analysis demands on teachers and leaders. Data analysis time needs to be identified as a priority and protected. So echoing what I mentioned before that a teacher mentioned, we have a lot of information. What are we doing with the information? And is it the right information? Leading right into the next driver is our comprehensive assessment system. One of the activities for this is really understanding what the assessment portfolio is at a given school and how does that map to the reading rope. So understanding there are many elements of and many strands to proficient reading. So this is Hollis Scarborough's famous reading rope. If any one of those strands is frayed, the rope is going to be weakened. So we want to make sure that we have assessment tools that are really able to identify and target each of these strands. One assessment may cover many of them, but we might need additional diagnostic and progress monitoring tools, for several of these strands to make sure we're making progress. And second to that is that data analysis. Digging a little deeper into that assessment portfolio, not only do we have to address all of the strands of the rope, but we need to make sure we have screening and progress monitoring. So those screening tools are so valuable because they're able to predict who is going to struggle. So if we can predict, we're sort of, decreasing the amount of time that student is struggling. And that progress monitoring is so important because we need to make sure that we're moving with urgency. There is critical windows for literacy to develop. And I know I am a victim of this as well, of me saying I'm doing the best for my students, but I have to be honest, a lot of times it wasn't enough. I wasn't getting the students to where I needed them to be, because if that slope is flat, they're never gonna catch up with their same age peers. Sorry. I also urge you as teachers and the school at large really to dig into, are the available assessments capturing where and how your students are encountering obstacles? I just want to stop there for a second. Okay, if you are able to identify where the students are encountering obstacles, are you able to identify actionable instructional steps to target the students' needs? All right, so who thinks that they have assessments that are really capturing where the students are struggling? Can you give me a thumbs up if you feel that your school has those tools available to you? Thumbs in the middle or thumbs down, please. Okay, so Megan's saying thumbs down, Brenda's in the middle, Diana's thumbs down. Okay, Evelyn is thumbs up. Okay, so we have a mix of things there. Now, those of you that feel that you have those assessment tools, are you able to create actionable instructional plans to meet the student's need with that information? You have the time and resources to do that. Thumbs up or thumbs down? Okay, so I'm seeing a couple, Haley and Brenda, thumbs down there. Gail is saying thumbs up, Evelyn's in the middle. Okay, so again, we have a bit of a mix there. In those data review processes, school stakeholders need to be supported and trained to administer, interpret, document, triangulate, and make instructional decisions based on that available assessment data. And that takes time. Time is a critical resource that this needs to be available for this driver. The next driver is evidence-based core and intervention curricula. So we want to make sure do a similar mapping. And when I say mapping, this is a document that will exist for both the assessments and the curricula so that teachers, leaders, anyone who walks into the school, parents as well, are available to know how the school is tackling each of these strands of the reading rope. So these curricula tools that are presently in place need to be evaluated so that the school is not taking, so that their effectiveness, the curriculum effectiveness is not being taken for granted. So really making sure we're understanding, are we implementing the curricula tool with fidelity, which is addressed in a different driver? But if we assume that it's being implemented with fidelity, is it being effective to the degree that we are comfortable with? Is it yielding the outcomes that we want it to yield? Or is it yielding outcomes at 60% who are struggling to read? These resources should be mapped and analyzed, and gaps and redundancies should be reviewed. Resources should then be allocated to filling in those gaps, and then we need professional development to support anything that we add there. Evidence-based practice, instructional practices includes having differentiated instruction at the core, and an evidence-based tiers 2 and tier 3 instructional practices. So this really needs to occur in an MTSS or RTI framework. So within this differentiated instruction driver, leadership and all faculty across general ed and special ed must take responsibility for struggling readers. This is not a special ed problem. Literacy is a continuum, okay? Special education and general education teachers need to work together, and everyone needs to take responsibility for those struggling readers as well. A clear documented system for decisions based on their tier assignment is present, and it's communicated to the school at large. So teachers, parents, leaders are all aware of how the decisions are made based on how students are assigned to those various tiers. So it isn't subjective. That also helps when we have staffing changes at the school. We're all following a documented map rather than having information siloed in individuals. Differentiated instruction based on scaffolding and task complexity are regularly discussed during planning meetings. And then tiers 2 and tiers 3 are evaluated with distinct criteria that is different from core instructional practices. So with the DELF framework, we're using reset rubrics that were specifically designed to really work with special education and intervention instruction, and really making sure that that instruction is evidence aligned. Then we have our supervision and evaluation tool, ensuring that the curriculum tools that we have selected, that we've spent time researching, is being implemented with fidelity, and that teachers are receiving support and feedback for this implementation. So the leadership is responsible for creating a culture that emphasizes a strict adherence to implementation fidelity and provides the resources for faculty to achieve this. So that includes professional development, protected time, logistical supports, resources, material, and space. The leadership acknowledges and provides and protects time for that database decision-making as well. For coaching and professional development, we need to make sure that we have content knowledge and that we provide coaching support for teaching. So the content knowledge is a necessary but not sufficient element for successful implementation for science of reading aligned literacy instruction. So getting the knowledge itself is not enough. How is it going to work and actually live in your classroom? What will it look like? Teachers, like students, need time and resources to develop the mastery in these skills. It's not going to happen overnight. So many of you said you didn't get this preparation in your pre-service, just like myself. It's taken me over a decade to develop my skills in this. And we need to give ourselves some grace in that time that we need to take for that improvement. Finally, but very importantly, family and community engagement is really important, excuse me. So the schools need to engage the family as critical players. As a parent, I feel really strongly that the parent input, they know their child, they know the home, they know the characteristics of their child, and their voices need to be heard and respected. The community and the family can support many of the initiatives that need to occur as we create some of these systemic changes. I would ask the schools to address the extent to which the school has policies, plans, and procedures that encourage meaningful parent involvement in literacy elements and beyond. Are they clearly communicated to parents? Do parents have an avenue to communicate their perspective of their child's literacy development in a meaningful way? And do they have an outlet to weigh in on the systemic changes that are occurring around the literacy reform? Okay, so I bet you're all wondering, and I'm not looking at the chat right this moment, but how are we doing this? So this is predicated on strategic inquiry, which I discussed with you earlier. So strategic inquiry is really that process of analyzing the school with the student in the foreground there, and removing the obstacles to the student's success. So we are simultaneously building capacity as well as familiarity and trust during substantial cultural shifts that are occurring within the school. So this much of what we're talking about here is not in adherence to the normative teaching culture that exists across our country. What's important is we're focusing on consistency in small but high leverage elements. So Zaretta Hammond, borrowing from Michael Fullen, mentions in a podcast, what are the small but high leverage things that need to shift? And I think that's a question that I would bookmark for yourself. So in strategic inquiry, we have 4 T's. We have teams, tasks, targets, and training. So we're going to address those. So thinking about our team, our DELF leadership team consists of school stakeholders, which includes principals, assistant principals of instruction, reading specialists, grade level leads, classroom teachers, district and network leadership. I have that twice on there, I apologize, as well as family engagement deans. So I apologize, my headphones are dying. So I'm switching over to my system. Can you all hear me still? Thank you. So we want to make sure that we have a representative group of individuals from the schools working together. It's really important that the classroom teachers' voices are heard in this discussion, that they feel free to perspective and the feasibility and what resources and obstacles they see. A lot of times I feel like leaders are sort of dictating what needs to be done. Teachers know their students in a very different and very critical way, so their voices need to be heard with that. Another important element is the research and advisory team. So this could be university partners and community partners. These external stakeholders are really critical in helping check and guide and provide a little motivation for the changes that need to occur. The presence of these external elements is often motivation for the school stakeholders to stay engaged and lean into the complexity. This is not easy work. It's not simple. There are no quick fixes. So it is going to take a lot of difficult decision-making over a long period of time. So I mentioned that we were going to be engaging in inquiry at multiple levels. So some macro levels of inquiry are our students performing as we would expect on outcome assessments. So at the school level, are your students performing as you would like on outcome assessments? Are they performing as you would expect? Okay, I think the answer is often no, that despite that we have data that may depict students progressing at appropriate levels, students are not performing as expected on outcome assessments. And then they're also underperforming in later grades when the shift to reading to learn occurs. So if we have assessments that are not accurately capturing or predicting what students' literacy achievement outcomes are going to be, I apologize. Given this evidence, is the data we have available to us accurately predicting literacy achievement outcomes? And if it's not, even though we have amazingly talented teachers like yourselves, we're not getting the results that our students need and deserve. And that's the stamp at the end of this. It's what do our students need and deserve that we need to develop.
So if our present assessments are not yielding the outcomes that we expect, it would seem that our assessments are not capturing difficulties for the students that our students are experiencing, and an action plan needs to occur. So some of the steps within this strategic inquiry are going to be to identify essential skill gaps for a group of struggling students, investigate school-wide learning conditions that allow this gap to persist, design and implement a strategic system change, measure and document results, and evaluate. And I'm going to give you a little vignette of how we're doing that at Mastery. So when Nancy and I began our partnership with Mastery, Mastery had already determined that phonemic awareness was a need across the network at large. So they identified that as we entered the system. But phonological awareness is a big thing. So we want to kind of really, when I ask you to identify an essential skill gap, I'm asking you to be very specific. You need to be able to diagnose and focus on a particular skill. The target has to be explicit because we need to be able to make sure everybody's on the same page about what we want to change. And then we also have to be explicit in how exactly we are going to measure it. And what those observable behaviors are going to be that will indicate success. So again, I'm urging you to start small to be able to go big. That is a critical element for this. So we're going to start with a small group of students on a specific skill, which we'll discuss. So at a macro level, Haggerty was already being used within the Mastery network. But the field site schools that we're working with, they made sure to purchase that and make sure it was being implemented across the K-2 band, because every child, so that every child was getting at a minimum of 10 minutes a day of explicit and systematic phonological and phonemic awareness. So we identified phonological and phonemic awareness as that target there. And at a macro level, that Haggerty was purchased. And I think a lot of people and schools would stop there. But we know that more is needed for some students, and that is not going to move the needle for a lot of our students. We created an improvement cycle where we were really identifying a small group of students and a very specific target. So we looked at 3 second grade homerooms. They were in a single band at a single school site were selected for this improvement cycle. And I'm calling them Pine, South, and Walnut. That is not their names. But anywhere from 10 to 15 students from each homeroom were selected as our collective unit for change. But what was the target? Phonological awareness is way too broad. Okay, so when we think about phonological awareness, this is an umbrella skill. There's lots of sub-skills that fall under that. So what exactly are we targeting, and how exactly are we measuring progress and success? So we took a look at the phonological hierarchy that Dr. David Kilpatrick uses from his framework. So understanding that phonological awareness starts with the awareness that our spoken language exists with individual words. And when I say the sentence, "May I have some milk?" Initially, children, young, babies are not aware that sounds like just one long continuous sound to them. But over time, they understand that milk has meaning, as Christina sort of suggested when we as young children were speaking our first words. It's that beginning of that awareness that that individual unit of sound has an associated meaning to that. Then students can develop smaller and smaller units of sounds. So we start at the word level, syllable level, develop rhyming and alliteration. And then ultimately, we get into this individual phonemes, which is really where we need to get our students to. In my breakout group, I conveyed that Dr. Kilpatrick really has encouraging educators to really shift to using the term phonemic proficiency rather than phonemic awareness, because we need our students to be more than aware. They have to be proficient. They have to be automatic. So what exactly does that mean? They have to be able to manipulate these phoneme units in less than 2 seconds. If it's taking more than that, it's drawing cognitive resources away from other higher level skills. So you and I are likely not thinking about how many sounds are in the word bat. And if I say bat, but now change the a to I, what word do we get? Bite. Okay. We don't have to necessarily think about that, but our young students are allocating resources to that. We know from cognitive science, when we read, our brain is still attending to every single sound and every single letter. It's just become automatized, and it's working at a subconscious level. It doesn't mean it's not happening. So we're not reading words as whole units. We still need to break those down. So we were working within a second grade unit. So by the end of second grade, we would expect our students to be at advanced phonemic proficiency. That should really say, so they should be operating certainly with accuracy at all advanced phonemic skills and developing automaticity with many of them. So looking at our Walnut classroom, we had 16 students that were selected. These students were below grade level on phonological awareness as measured by MAP fluency. They were below level on phonics knowledge as measured by a Foundations placement survey. And they were below level on David Kilpatrick's phonological assessment screening test, which is called the PAST test. That will also be in the Leave Behind package. I will provide you with a link to his website where he has that tool. So again, we have those 4 levels of phonological awareness. So when we looked at our students here, we assessed them on that PAST assessment. The majority of the students that we identified in the Walnut classroom were operating at the basic syllable level. So that is the first level of phonological awareness. They were still having difficulty developing their awareness of words or not words, excuse me, but syllables and onsets. And so that is where they were starting. We had a few students who were at that second level of phonemic awareness at that onset rhyme level. And then these letters over here, D1, D2, there are multiple levels within each broad phonological awareness level. So we have D1 and D2 at, and E2 and E3 at the basic syllable targets that we were looking at. We then developed and designed a 6-week intervention cycle. So this 6-week intervention cycle consists of daily 10 to 12 minutes scheduled for explicit systematic phonemic awareness instruction with a fading scaffolding support framework. Remembering all of the students are getting 10 minutes a day of the explicit phonemic awareness from the Heggerty. They're also getting an additional 10 to 12 minutes working in a small group, in a homogeneous group, based on where they were on the past assessments. We're utilizing David Kilpatrick's Equipped for Reading Success. I highly encourage all of you to purchase this text. It is invaluable. It is well worn, as I use it pretty much near constantly. But based on Kilpatrick's framework, phonemic awareness work is auditory. And we're working on students being able to identify and manipulate units of sound. And that unit varies based on the individual skill data. So even though we have second grade students who we would expect to be at advanced levels for phonemic awareness, they're nowhere near that. I can't jump in on these steps all the way at the top. I need to go back to the beginning and meet the students where they are. So these students are all grouped based on where they were performing on the past assessments. Teachers were expected to take formative notes during these 10 to 12 minutes, identifying what was hard for students, who was having a harder time. And those notes are then brought to planning meetings to be discussed with the leadership, as well as myself as part of the external team working with them. There's weekly individual assessments so that we can document progress. And every 2 weeks, we adjust the groupings based on the changes reflected by the student data, so that we can move students onto more complex elements of phonemic and phonological awareness. So the mantra that we are saying is we're going to go as fast as we can, but as slowly as we must, okay? Because if we push our students too quickly and they're not developing the accuracy and the automaticity, this is not going to be successful. So this is a critical skill that students need to have to be able to read proficiently. So if they don't have this and I don't allocate this time, they're not going to make progress.
Hi, Jacqueline. I hate to interrupt. We're at 12:05, and I think we need to move on to our keynote speaker. If there are some last thoughts that you want to share with the group, that would be great.
Can I just show one more screen? I'm sorry.
Of course, yes, thank you.
I lost my PowerPoint now. So just looking at some of our students, we have our students making substantial changes. So we had one of our students who was starting at the D1 level at the beginning of this, and he has already moved up into the phonemic awareness level at the level of H. So the goal was really, the specific target that we were getting to was that by the end of the 6 weeks, that all students would move to another band of phonological awareness, which we're already seeing the results for. Christina was able to do this with a group of students at a different school, and she saw those students across the full 6 weeks they've already completed. Some of those students are already back on grade level for the phonemic awareness targets. So these small changes add up very, very quickly. And so I would just encourage you with your students in your classes to think about what are the specific skills, create a 6-week intervention cycle, evaluate that, and really think about what are the obstacles of the school system that are getting in the way for your students to become independent learners in their reading skills. And I think you'll be very surprised and impressed about the progress that they're able to make.
Thank you. And again, as Jacqueline said, all of these slides will be available. And if you have any questions, please reach out. We will make sure that we have contact information available if you do have additional questions. So I would like to now welcome our extraordinary keynote speaker, Erica Snowden. Erica is Director of Equity and Multicultural Education at Friends Central School. Erica is a nationally recognized expert in the field of diversity and inclusion. She is widely published. She's frequently asked to present at national and local conferences, and we just feel really lucky and blessed to have her with us today. So thank you, Erica. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Elizabeth. So glad to be here today. Really excited to see so many teachers online on a Saturday when I know you're really tired. And so I'm going to honor your time the best that I can today, and really jump in. Want to say thank you to the organization for having me here. Also, all the presenters today who've been sharing this beautiful work, and just listening to Jacqueline just now, thinking about how students learn to read and really how important that is. And I kind of want to take that and think about, like, how do we get kids to want to read, to love to read, to be engaged, and what that means for us with an equity lens as well. So I'm going to jump in and share the screen. I would love if people participate in the chat and share out and send those fun emojis if things pop out to you. So let's get started. All right, so the topic of my presentation today is the Midas Touch. And I know when you think about the Midas Touch and you see my spelling here, and you might go like, Midas with a T. Yeah, well, my identity tells a story. And so when we think about the Midas touch in that story, we think about, you know, having this golden touch and everything you touch turns into gold, right? And then some people use it in a way to think about, you know, everything that I put my hands to is successful. And so I want us to think about equitable literacy and how, when we put our hands into it, when we put ourselves into it, that can help it be more successful. And also when we allow our students to do the same thing, it would also give them greater success. So this is just a little bit about me. I'm Erica Snowden. My pronouns are she and they. I'm the Director of Equity, Belonging, and Inclusion at Friends Central School. I'm also a racial literacy trainer for Lion Story, and I've been in education for 18 years. And if I really think about it, I feel like I've been an educator in training since I was 14. And here are some ways that you can follow me. So when I think about myself, it's important to share with you a little bit about me. I consider myself to be many things, but a few of those things when I think about my identity and how I tell a story about who I am and what I love and what I engage in. I'm a Black cisgender woman. I'm a daughter, I'm a mother, a sister, a friend, an educator, a social justice warrior, a baby baker. I would really like to be a better baker and learn how to design, but I consider myself a baby baker, a super taster, a fly nerd, and a learner. So when you think about who you are, right, what would your identity map look like? And even realizing who I am, I have to realize whose land I'm on. And so the land that I'm presently on in Philadelphia and these surrounding areas is the original land of the Lenape people. I acknowledge their continual existence as a people. They're here with us today, honoring the original caretakers of this land, recognizing the histories of land theft, violence, erasure, and oppression that's brought all of us here. And for those folks who are streaming this on YouTube and watching later, whose land are you on? So today, as we engage online here, I always like to use the 4 agreements from Glenn Singleton's work in Courageous Conversations. I'm going to ask you all online to do the best you can to stay present and engaged, but also self-care is advised. We're all adults. We can do what we need to do to take care of ourselves. You might need to stretch a little bit, right? Lean into discomfort. And with that, as I share today, I'm also encouraging you to expand your comfort zone. So as you continue to do this work and to get this mindset around diversity, equity, inclusion, and ABAR lens and anti-bias, anti-racist lens, right? How do you expand your comfort zone so you find yourself having less discomfort? Also in the chat and when you're hanging out, speak your truth. And I think it's really important to still use this acronym for THINK, right? Is it true? Is it honest? Is it inspiring? Is it necessary? Is it kind? And I find that as adults, we still need those things. And sometimes in a virtual setting, we need reminders about that. Last but not least, expect and accept a lack of closure that I have until 1 o'clock today. And I want to hang out with you all. But how can we continue after this? How can you continue your own journey after this? So I want to do a little bit of grounding before I get started as we think about how my identity tells a story, right? What are my social identities? And oftentimes we talk about the big 8 social identities. There are 9 here. I often interchange ethnicity with age, right? Gender, sexual orientation, ability, nationality, class, race, ethnicity, and religion, right? And so here we are thinking about all of our social identities and many more, and how can we tap into those identities with our students, with our readers, right? And how can we allow them to see themselves in what we're doing, to see themselves in literacy? And in order to do that, we have to think about intersectionality. Gotta love a little SpongeBob meme, right? And so when we think about intersectionality, we have to give credit to Kimberly Crenshaw, who says that intersectionality is a lens through which you can see where power comes and collides, where it locks and intersects. It is the acknowledgement that everyone has their own unique experiences of discrimination and privilege. So where do your identities lock and intersect? Where do they come together? What are the identities of your students? How do they come together and lock and intersect, right? And yes, I just talked to you about the big 8, but even as we broaden our thinking and we think about mental health, when we think about education and body size, right? How do all of those things make us who we are? And how can we tap into those identities to get our readers excited about reading and learning? So when I think about my identity telling a story and I think about literacy, I had to tell you about a book that changed my life. And I'm wondering if in the chat you can just pop in there, what book changed your life, right? And so I'll model for you. I think I was about 13 or 14. I was in high school when I read The Coldest Winter Ever by Sister Souljah. And if you've never read it, I encourage you to go out to your local bookstore and order this book, read this book, right? And so in this book, this was the first book that I read where I was like, whoa, I can see myself in this. Like, I read the book in one day, I couldn't put it down. I tried to go to sleep at night. I had to continue reading it because I felt like I saw myself. I was like, oh my goodness, there's this main character, Winter. She's a girl. She's running the show. I can relate to that. She was a Black girl, and it was in a city, and she lived in what we would consider an urban neighborhood, right? And her family wasn't like a well-to-do family or anything like that, but she had both parents in the household, and she was a young teenager. There was so much that I could connect to in the story that it made me want to really read. So I see some people dropping in White Fragility into the chat. For sure, definitely love Robin DiAngelo. What other books changed your life? And I'm going to encourage you to think about, if that doesn't come to you quickly, that means that you're going to keep reading, because we're educators, we're always doing that. But also, are there books that your students would tell you changed their lives, right? Are there books that they just love to read, they grasp all the time? Choice Words by Peter Johnston, Upper Road Slowly by Irene Hunt, Teaching to Transgress. Yes, friend. Outliers, okay? This is a time where we can also crowdsource, right? So as we're crowdsourcing right now, if you don't know these books, like, write them down, grab the chat, so later on you can check them out, right? Because these are books that change our lives. And if we want to think about equitable literacy, we want to change the lives of our students, right? We want to help them read the world around them. And sometimes that's through actual books. Sometimes that's going to be through their cell phones. Sometimes that's going to be when they are reading in the car and they see the McDonald's sign, they're like, McDonald's, right? And so how do we help them read the world and love reading, right? What's going to change their lives, right? I choose to stay. Beautiful. Thanks for sharing. Keep those coming. And so when you think about what books change your life, right, you want to think about this concept of windows and mirrors, which comes from Emily Stile and Rudine Sims Bishop. And I love this idea of windows and mirrors, and that in our world, not only in our books, but in our lives, everything around us, how do we have mirrors in place where we can see reflections of ourselves? And not just any old reflection, but positive reflections of ourselves, right? And then how do we have these opportunities to see through windows into the lives of others, to learn about people who are different from us in a positive way that's going to be affirming, that's going to allow us to broaden our perspective, and even more so, gain empathy. So Rudine Sims Bishop says this major quote that I love: when children cannot find themselves reflected in the books they read, or when the images they see are distorted, negative, or laughable, they learn a powerful lesson about how they are devalued in the society of which they are a part. If they see only reflections of themselves, they will grow up with an exaggerated sense of their own importance and value in the world, a dangerous ethnocentrism. So when you think about this, I love her words because she reminds us not only do these windows and mirrors need to be positive, but when we show negative images, we devalue folks, right? And if there are no images, right, there aren't any images, then we are also devaluing folks as well, right? And so as teachers, as educators, how do our libraries in the classroom, how do our walls help to show value to all folks, whether they are represented in that classroom cohort that we have, or if they're just in this world, right? How do we do that work? And then Emily Style, I love what she said because she got really pointed, because when we think about equitable literacy, when we think about how our identity tells a story, we have to think about, okay, how was this world created? What kind of world have we been socialized in, right? And so if we think about racial socialization, Emily Style says, traditionally, curriculum gives white males many mirrors to look in and few windows which frame others' lives. Women and men of color, on the other hand, find almost no mirrors of themselves in the curriculum. For them, it is often all windows. So Emily speaks directly to folks who go, well, what if my school is all this? What if my school is all that, right? What if my school is all white, right? Well, we need to make sure that those folks have a window into the lives of others so that we can help them escape from this dangerous ethnocentrism, right? So they realize that the world just isn't about them. So I'm wondering if you can think for a minute right now, what identities are represented in your curriculum, in your classroom library, in your home with your children, because this is for them as well, on the walls of your home, on the walls of your classroom, right? So when you walk through and you do like an audit for belonging, right? Do I see visuals of people who look like me, who are different from me? Do I see them in positive ways? What does that look like? Are the classrooms in my classroom representative of different shades of people? Are the books representative of different people who have different genders and religions and sexual orientations and family structures? How can I make sure that my classroom is offering windows and mirrors? And so as you think about your identity and how your identity tells a story and the identities of your students tell stories, and you think about your library and you think about how there are windows and mirrors, I love this graphic here that I want to share with you. And just pop in the chat if you've seen this graphic before, thinking about diversity in children's book. And so it shows the percentage of books of the main characters from diverse backgrounds. And so if you've seen this before, just pop in the chat, seen it, haven't seen it, right? Just wondering for how many folks have seen this. But in 2018, we saw that 50% of our books had white main characters in them, right? And so I love that so many people have seen this because we have this data here from 2018. And then I had to go and do a little bit of a search. In 2019, the numbers changed a little bit. You might notice a little bit here, right, of a difference or a change. But are you telling me that we have more books about animals and other kinds of made up characters than people of the global majority? Yes, that's what I'm telling you. And so if we're living in a world where we know that the global majority are people of color, right? How do we make sure that in our classrooms, in the books that children are reading, we're trying to teach them how to read? We want this done equitably, but they don't see themselves. They are nowhere in the curriculum. They aren't found in that library. So how do we make the difference in our own personal libraries to change this? So I want to go back to Emily Stiles because she says some amazing things, and something that she said that kind of really guides what I'm thinking about and when I'm working with students. She says half the curriculum walks in with the students. What if we change our mindsets to stop thinking that the slate is empty when students come in and realize that they are 50% half of the curriculum that I'm teaching? They have a huge schema already when they come into the classroom. They can teach me, they can teach each other. How do we balance the selves and the shelves? How do I balance the scholarship of the students in my classroom with what I am teaching on the shelf in this curriculum that's based in, and all of these things that I've been taught to do, that I've been told that I have to do? How do I take what they already know, who they are, the value that they have, let their identity tell a story to then help guide what I'm trying to teach them and give them these skills. How do we do that, right? They're half the curriculum. If they're half the curriculum, then that should shape what we're doing. And that should tell us that we can channel what they already have to improve and increase their learning, to increase their literacy, right? And to do that, we have to think about critical literacy. And I pulled this from Read, Write, and Think, which tells us that critical literacy involves reading critically, thinking about the identity and the intent of the writer and the social and historical context in which the text was written, right? And as you read, you think about these different questions, right? Who's the author? Why did the author write this piece? Who is the attendant audience? You can read the rest of this for yourself. But what I want to think about is some people might think, oh, you can't do this with younger children. You have to wait until they're this age. You can do this with all children. And even when you're teaching them about phonological awareness and phonemic awareness that Jacqueline was talking about and referring to, then you don't have to ask them questions that really gauge how well they can sound out the words, but they can look at the pictures that are there and have this critical literacy already starting, right? Look at this book. Let's just look at the pictures really quickly. What do you notice and what connections can you make for yourself, right? I'm always asking kids, what mirrors do you see in this story, right? What windows do you see? At this point, I can talk to kindergartners and they can tell me, oh, well, something that's different from me in there is that character eats all their vegetables and I never eat my vegetables, right? That may seem small, but how does that grow as the child gets older, right? And how do we start asking children, whose voice is represented here, right? How do we talk? Yes, thank you, Christina, eliciting oral language. Whose voice is represented here? Oh, this book is about, boys going on a trip, right? Well, where are the girls? Do girls go on trips? Let's find some books that show girls going on trips, right? How do we start using this critical literacy from the identities, from the scholarship in the students who step into our classroom, who are half of the curriculum, to help them learn to read, love to read, and to provide an equitable playing ground so that they could see themselves in this. And so I grabbed this from Dana Riceboard, which I think is awesome because I love different kinds of tools that I can go out and go like, oh, I can do this. How can I go and do this, right? So some classroom practices and the goals that they help us accomplish, right? And so how am I connecting literacy to social justice? If my students are half of the curriculum and they're living in a socially unjust world that they can be the change for, how do I connect their reading with their everyday lives, which they actually have scholarship in because they're living these lives? They have real experiences that they can bring to the classroom to help us learn, to help us guide our thinking. How can I encourage them to take social action, even at a young age? And I think a lot of the work that we want to do is like, how do we take these concepts? Even as I was listening to Jacqueline, how do we take these concepts that we're learning? How do we put them into action, right? We get these new orders for curriculum and things that we have to do and mandates, right? How do we put it into action? How do we take these steps to move toward it? And how do we also help students to read multiple perspectives in a book, right? How do we help them think critically? How do we help them see themselves as scholars, as readers, even if there may be some challenges in areas of growth? How can I still identify the greatness, the light in a student who may not be the best reader in my class, but can you be the best critical thinker and maybe not the best person in trying to figure out what the words are on the page? Absolutely. So how, in lifting up their identities, the stories that are within them, how can I do that? How can I help with joy, right? And so many of you who are on right now probably received this in the mail, Milo's Museum by Zeta Elliott, How many of you know this book? Can you pop in the chat? Do you know this book? Have you heard it? Or maybe you got it in the mail. It's one of my favorite books to use, not just with students, but with teachers, because I love to read to teachers. Everyone loves to hear a book read to them. And I think that's why Audible and all those things are pretty cool. And so if you look at this book, Milo's Museum by Zeta Elliott, in this picture book, Milo goes to the museum with her grandfather. Oh my gosh, yes. Okay, enjoyed reading this book. Awesome, I love that. Got it in the mail, adding it to the library, read it in 2 weeks. Yes. So when Milo goes into the museum, which I make a direct connection to even as an adult, Milo's like, wait a minute, where are people who look like me? And she is asking her grandfather about it. And I love the fact that she's on a field trip with her grandfather, because not all of our family structures are set up where our parents can go on a field trip with us, right? So it might be another caregiver or a loved one around, right? And so when she's reading this book, she comes up with this idea of like, okay, I'm going to make my own museum where everyone can see themselves in this museum, right? And see themselves positively. And in the end, she names the museum Milo's Museum, but then she thinks and she's like, wait a minute, it's not about me, it's the people's museum, right? And so even in this book, how do you use it to talk about windows and mirrors with students, right? And then like whose voice is present? And when you read this book with students, what I love is that I start to ask them, okay, look around you and see whose voice is present, right? Look at your toys. Whose voice is present? Who's missing in your toys, right? And I'm a collector of Barbies. And so when I have all my different diverse Barbie's doing a better job than she used to do. And so when I share these Barbies with my students, I get to tell them about how I want to see visual representations in a positive way of people who are different from me, but also people who are like me, right? And so then the students start saying, well, I told my parents that they have to get me a Black doll, or I told my parents that they have to give me a non-binary doll, or I want a pink book bag because you said pink is for boys too, and pink can be for anyone, right? And so how do we let students know that the scholarship that's within them, right, is so important that it's also in the books that they're reading? Because when they can find themselves in those books that they're reading and learning to read, maybe that will help them cultivate a love for reading to become lifelong readers, right? And how can we help them to bring a social justice lens to that as well? And then if those voices aren't there, because sometimes I keep books that aren't particularly great books anymore, to then say, whose voice is missing here? Like, so for instance, it's Native American Heritage Month, and we read a few books that are older books that are about Columbus. And I say to students, okay, whose voice is missing? What do they want us to believe in this book? All right, let's find those missing voices, right? And so then we go when we find stories of the Taino, and we read Encounter, and we look at the different perspectives, and then we think and talk critically about what's going on and what's happening. And I love the fact that students are so eager to find things that are unjust. They can point them out immediately. And so how do I take that and make it tangible for their everyday lives? How do I do this for them? If you weren't one of the first 100 registrants and you didn't get this book for free, I apologize, but please find your local bookstore. Many of you, I think, are maybe in the Philadelphia area. Please go to Uncle Bobby's and Harriet's Bookshop. Those are two of my favorites. And get this book for yourself, Milo's Museum. I'm going to share a bunch of other books too, because I love sharing books. And I also shared a book list of favorite books as we think about how do we make our libraries more diverse, more inclusive, a place of belonging for students, that even if you're in a school where maybe you don't see a lot of individuals who look like you see yourself in the books that you are reading. Yes, I love Uncle Bobby's and Harry's. Yes, if you go to Uncle Bobby's, try the drink, The Summer Breeze. It's one of my favorites. So when I think about this book, Milo's Museum, what can I teach from this book? What identities are there in this book, right? And so just from Milo's Museum, I can talk about race. I can talk about family structure. I can talk about gender. I can talk about class. I can talk about age. I can talk about sexual orientation. And so we can think about, how do we take one book and talk about multiple things and have this critical literacy, but allowing our identities to tell a story that is also intersectional, right? And so now when we ask a student to read a book and write a summary of the book, what if we say, okay, you read this book, talk about, the theme of this book and the main idea, and then let me know what connections, what mirrors and windows you made to this story. And if you're given a book buzz, right? What would you say in your book buzz to get other people to read it that may be different from them or like them? And so when we think about literacy and we think about our personal identities, I love Chimamanda's work about the danger of a single story, because when we allow ourselves to give students and for our personal selves more books that allow us to have windows into the lives of others that also mirror ourselves and who we are, we can move away from this idea of a single story. Chimamanda says stories matter. Many stories matter. Stories have been used to dispossess and to malign, but stories can also be used to empower and to humanize. So how do we do that with our libraries? Stories can break the dignity of a people, but stories can also repair that broken dignity. How can stories heal? When we reject the single story, when we realize that there is never a single story about any place, we regain a kind of paradise. So I share with you at the beginning of the talk the book that changed my life, and that was The Coldest Winter Ever. But one book that I really love that I read in my elementary school in Detroit, Michigan, where I'm from, Alonzo Bates Academy, I read Beloved. And Toni Morrison, Gotta Love Her, right? And when I read Beloved, I was like, whoa, this is a narrative that looks at the oppression of Black folks, but also teaches me about aspects of resistance, but also it's written by a Black woman. And there's this different perspective that is there. It's a different story, right? And so when we think about literacy, right, our teaching of literacy can either it can either repair and heal, or it can dehumanize. And I think because you're here on a Saturday, been here early in the morning, it's like 12:30 now or something like that, that you want to heal, you want to repair, right? So how can we do that with our stories? How can we do that with our equitable literacy framework? How can we do that with allowing our students to bring in their own identities into the stories and also bringing our own in? Because a lot of the work is about us modeling this for our students as well. So if you're looking in the chat, please check it out, because I'm seeing like Hakeem's Bookstore, which I don't know. I hope I pronounced that name correctly. When you're thinking about how you are thinking about your equitable literacy and how you are expanding your libraries to be more reflective of your students, but also giving them more windows and mirrors, check out these Black-owned and or marginalized groups, bookstores, underrepresented bookstores. Please share with them. And I understand sometimes that people need things quickly and they use Amazon too. So I'm not hating on Amazon or anything like that. But if you can go to these local bookstores, they need us. So now I want to get into the fun part, because I do want to have some time for some questions. I'm going to share some books with you. And so these are just a few of my favorites. And the thing about slides is that you don't have enough space. But what I will share is that these are some books that I love that allow you to think about these windows and mirrors and how you expand your libraries and your classroom. And so in nursery through 2, these are some of my favorite books. We're different, we're the same. Our Skin, Harriet Gets Carried Away, Pink is for Boys. So some of them ring out to you immediately like, oh, this is a book that's going to allow me to talk about different identities and allow my students to make connections. And then there are others where you just need to have books with characters who are doing regular things in everyday life, especially when we think about underrepresented groups, right? We want to make sure that we give this joy. And I think Christina was talking about that too, in her talk, that joy, right? How do we give that aspect of resistance and liberation, right? And so I love Harriet Gets Carried Away for that, because Harriet goes into the store. Harriet's dressed up like a penguin and goes to this imaginative piece, right? And you see Harriet has this brown skin, right? But then Harriet has 2 dads, which is pretty cool, right? And so when you're thinking about these stories, doing everything that kids can connect to, right? Kids are like, oh, I like to dress up in my costume too, right? There we have a mirror for that student. And then we think about like, oh, her family has 2 dads. That's different. Well, who is that like in our classroom or in our community? How do we do that work? How do we help them to think critically and talk critically and engage in these conversations with each other, but also to bring their own identities into the classroom so that we remind them that they're 50% of the curriculum, that they are just as much as important as the shelves and the curriculum that's there, right? Grades 3 through 5, some of my favorites: The Skin You Live In, M is for Melanin, When We Were Alone, which is a great book that talks about the boarding schools for Indigenous people and families, which has us look at all different family structures and how they look. And Heartpicked, this is Adoption Awareness Month. Heartpicked is an adoption story. And what I love about Heartpicked is that it shows a family of color adopting, right? And so sometimes we can use those books to break those different narratives, right? Or stereotypes, right? And so here it is, again, healing, repairing through stories, through equitable literacy, equitable literature. This book is anti-racist. I have a little mistake there. I apologize about that. Tiffany Jewell is our Distinguished Justice Speaker this year. Most of these books should be on my list, Christina, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to share probably a PDF of this to share with people and put on the website so that you can have it. Jacqueline Woodson's Harbor Me. If you don't know Harbor Me, you just need to read it as a person who loves to read. Because first of all, Jacqueline Woodson is just amazing. I love her. I love all of her books. And in Harbor Me, she has this group of, I think they're like middle school children who are having conversations, but their identities and perspectives are vast and diverse, and they each tell their own story. And it's really a beautiful way to talk with middle schoolers about their own identities, intersectionality, and their stories, and they build empathy for each other. So when you talk about how do you create and cultivate a garden of readers and beautiful human beings who have empathy and can do hard things and talk about hard topics, Harbor Me is great for that. Not My Idea is a book about whiteness. If you're doing racial affinity groups, or if you have some specific work that you're doing around race, like this is a beautiful book to use for kids in middle school. Just Ask, when we're thinking about ability and ableism, differences in learning, beautiful book to use there. I love George, and Alex Gino received some feedback about using the student's dead name to name the story. And so many people have been crossing out George and saying Melissa's story, which is awesome when you think about how you teach students about agency and their own personal stories. And if my identity tells a story, then my identity means that I can name the story what I want it to be. Grades 9 through 12, it's so tough sometimes with high school students because oftentimes I'm like, they could read the same books that I'm reading too, right? And so it was really hard to think about what books to share with them. But what I will tell you is that with my high school students, I still share picture books with them. And they enjoy having books read to them. And even when I read to teachers last year, we read a picture book and they were like, it was just so nice to listen to someone's voice and read, right? And so Your Legacy is a picture book about reclaiming our enslaved history, right? And thinking about enslavement of African folks. And it's just a beautiful story, so much joy that lifts up the resistance and the resilience and the rebellion of enslaved folks, and how that story is oftentimes not told. So when we think about critical literacy, right, and what does this text that's in our curriculum want us to think and believe, let me send my students out on a scavenger hunt to find different perspectives, to find different voices. And this picture book is really awesome. You can pair it with a history unit that you may be doing. Tell me who you are. So many different stories of different individuals across the country talking about their identities and intersectionality around race, culture, and identity. Little fires everywhere. I mean, the intersectionality within this book is amazing. The drama within this book is awesome. And then after you read it, if you want to go on, I think it's like Hulu or something like that, and watch the show, they did a pretty good job of doing it. That's awesome too. Have a watch party. All Boys Aren't Blue. I read that with some high school students this year, and it's just been a really great book for us to talk about the patriarchy and gender and sexual orientation and misogyny and just everything that I thought I was going to teach kind of went out the window, because what the students brought, that 50% that they brought in, was so much better than what I had, and really helped to drive what we were doing. And of course, Tommy Orange's There, which talks about Indigenous communities. And then for us as adults, I love reading the things that are considered books for children. But I also know that I have to constantly learn, right? And I think that if you're an educator, like I said before, we're constantly learning, we're lifelong learners. How am I keeping up with what's happening? So just a few great books here. The Guide for White Women Who Teach Black Boys. So you want to talk about race, how to be an anti-racist. Everyone knows this one, An Indigenous People's History of the United States. And then This Book is Gay by Juno Dawson. When we think about pronouns, when we think about trying to break down and understand all these different words around gender and sexual orientation. And so I am doing really good. I know I've been talking fast, but I wanted to make sure that I got to some time for questions. I'm wrapping this up to say, how does your identity tell a story? How are you helping your students to tell their own stories? How do you allow them to access their Midas Touch? How do you access your Midas Touch and model in your classrooms? How are you thinking about equitable literacy differently? What is it that's, when you think about the teaching of literacy and how to make that more equitable, how can you do something right now, today, tomorrow, to help your classroom to be more equitable? Well, that's bringing in more books that's going to help your students tell their own stories and to engage critically. So I'm going to stop sharing now and open it up for any questions or feedback. It's so great to see all these faces now. I couldn't see them while I was presenting. So I'm going to make sure that I'll give a PDF of the presentation so that people can have the presentation. Happy to share that. Oh my gosh, yes, I know the book, I Am Enough. I love that book. And actually, I made copies of that book and had the pictures when students could then make their own identity maps. And so they cut out different pictures from that. So that's another thing that I do with books, that when I think about identity maps with children, when I have them think about making a collage of who they are, the books that they love, we make copies of those books. Sometimes students like to trace, so they trace the pictures of those books and then use them, right? Because it's easy for them to then find those mirrors of themselves. And Pinterest is also a great place where you can find all different visuals to use with students. Did anybody see any books that they were like, oh, I don't know that book? Or I'm wondering if other people have good recommendations for books that are coming out. I love Our Skin. That was one that was up there. This is the board book, but they also have just the hardcover now. And I just love the visuals of this. Also thinking about, you know, equitable literacy and understanding that sometimes now when we start talking about skin color, you know, there's a whole new conversation around whether or not we are fetishizing skin color when we call it like chocolate or caramel and things like that. And so how can you use those books, but then pair them with something like these? I love crayons, I love the color and those multicultural crayons, but the colors are like medium almond, light medium rose. So how do we pair that with a kid saying, oh, it looks like a brownie? And then you say, okay, so what would that be here? So we can try to use the scholarship that they already have and pair it with something on the shelf, right? Oh my gosh, so many good books in here. Ada Twist Scientist. Let me tell you, that Netflix show that pairs with those books, it gives me such joy in life. If you haven't seen it, you need to watch it. They brought all the characters to life. They got Rosie, the Revere on there too. Awesome. The Day You Begin, yeah, Jacqueline Woodson, for sure. Green Pants. Could I share the slide for 9 through 12? Yes, I can. Let's do that for folks. This Tell Me Who You Are is a huge text. It's so awesome. And the story of the young ladies who wrote it, they actually wrote it after they graduated from high school. They took like a year off and wrote this book. Yes, Separate is Never Equal. Julian is a Mermaid, yes. And then what's the one after that? Because I have that one too. Julian Goes to a Wedding or something like that. So beautiful, so awesome. Your Name is a Song. I just taught that one. Yeah, and then we had everybody sing their name after we read it. So awesome. Other thoughts or questions?
Erica, I just want to say thank you for this list and the additional titles on the slide, and thank you to everyone who's putting things into the chat. I'm expecting my first child, and we're 6 months along, and I feel like you just made my entire like baby book like registry for me, so I'm just gonna like copy and paste it, like this is what I want. So thank you for sharing all these and for this amazing talk.
Thank you so much, Christina. Yeah, I love to get the resources from everyone else too, right? Because we have to realize that a lot of the scholarship is on this call right now, right? And yes, I see in the chat, the Graceland board books are great, dim sum for everyone, and bringing in the new year. Also, Eyes That Smile in the Corners. Am I saying it right? I think that's the new one. I love that book. And for students who identify with some Asian heritage, it's a beautiful book. It just came out recently. And so I just know that you all are so powerful in what you do as educators. I mean, I look at the different memes and it's like, you know, teachers are having a tough time right now because we weren't prepared for this Isaac kiss in the quarters. Thank you, Allison. And so I just want to thank you all and really hats off to you, give you your kudos, your virtual flowers right now, because what you do is so important. And I don't know if we can ever pay educators what they're worth, right? But what you do is so valuable. And you, next to families and caregivers and parents, the first teachers, you just have so much power. And so if we think about the students that we teach and teach them as if they were our own children, if we teach them realizing that having them in our hands gives us opportunity to heal the world, literally, like what you do is just so powerful. And I just want to say thank you, because it just takes amazing people. And I'm feeling emotional about this because I just know that, you know, it's hard out here to be an educator these days. And I have been learning to give COVID tests, which clearly that wasn't in my teacher preparation program. And so just all that you do, you know, I just want to thank you and for being here on a Saturday, giving your time, still learning for yourselves, your children, whether they are children that you birthed or the children in your classrooms, children in your home that you care for. I know that you can never take off the educator hat. It just happens. You can be in the Target and you see a student, you're like, dear, you might want to pick that up and put it back on the shelf, you know, because I just can't help it. I'm like, oh my. So, you know, I just want to thank you all again. Helen Oaks Literacy Programming, I just want to thank you for this opportunity. This work is so valuable. And thank you all again. And congratulations, Christina, on the new baby. That's really exciting. I'm expecting a nephew like in days. I just can't wait till he gets here. So thank you all so much. Have a good Saturday. I hope you get some rest. Thank you again.
Thank you so much, Erica. You know, this was amazing. We really appreciate your time. We want to thank all of our speakers today, Nancy, Saruchi, Christina, Jacqueline, for their time and the wealth of information. Again, we will make sure that all of the presentations are uploaded to the site. There's Erica's book list. There's a ton of resources that is available on the Helen Oaks site. And this site will be available to you now that you have your login information. Please use it. We are considering this a community of practice. You are all Helen Oaks scholars. I want to take a minute to thank Dennis and Jeffrey Oaks for their support because we couldn't do this without them. And most importantly, I want to thank all of you for joining us. Again, you gave up a Saturday to spend your time, and Foundations is really dedicated to improving the quality of instruction, the quality of education for all of our students, because we really believe in creating a brighter future for every child every day. So thank you so much for your time. Please, a couple of things before you leave. We have a feedback survey. There will be a link in the chat for you. Take a minute to fill that out for us. You know, we really want to keep improving and keep bringing you these amazing resources. We also will be convening additional sessions, so keep an eye out for upcoming emails about bringing the Oaks Scholars back together for additional networking opportunities and professional learning experiences. And then finally, if you have time, February 23rd through the 26th in 2022, so that's this February, Foundations is hosting the annual Beyond School Hours Conference. It's 3.5 days of professional learning. Again, we know how hard you all work. We are here to support you. Come join us in Orlando. And it will be a wonderful in-person experience where we can come together and network and again have some skills and opportunities and resources to take back with us to make sure that we are serving the children and family that really need us the most. So again, thank you so much. We appreciate your time. This has been a wonderful experience. I get so excited. I know it's something that is a lot of work to put together, but we have such a good time when we do it. Thank you so much. Rhonda, did you want to say anything?
No, I just want to add to thank you. Erica, I love you. You are tremendous. Every speaker was fabulous. And scholars, you will be scholars forever. Helen would be so, so proud. So thank you. And I look forward to seeing all of you soon. Thanks, Elizabeth.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Helen Oaks Institute. It just was a wonderful privilege to be able to present.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Nancy.
Elizabeth, it seems like some people are having trouble accessing the survey.
Yeah, they will also get an email about the survey. So if you can't get it through the link right now, then you will receive an email following the event with the link to the survey.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks.